Hey guys, still here. Today we're looking at a newer player. This is Disco. Now, Disco sent in his replay of this match, and his request was, can you have a look at it and tell me what I can do better? Because I am learning this game, I want to get better at the game, and my videos have helped him already, but he'd like to actually get a bit of commentary on the game itself, so that's what I'm going to do. So this is not some sort of condescending super video like look at how good I am. This is just to help him out. And therefore I'll try to point out as many things as possible that I would do different. And I hope that you guys can do the same thing. Just saying, oh my god, this is cringeworthy is not helping. If you see something, please make a comment with a timestamp to make sure that we know exactly when it's happening and what he can do better. Because once upon a time, we were all beginners at this game. You may be that special snowflake that was born with wargame skills, but I had to learn everything, and probably you guys did too. Anyway, the deck that Disco is using is a US standard deck. He says it is modified to be turtle-ish. Now that is your first mistake. If you're going to take a deck that is designed to be holding terrain and not so much pushing forward, then Conquest mode is not really the game mode for you. The only way that I see it working is if you have a player who is dedicated to defending terrain and another one, preferably on TeamSpeak or someone who you know really well, who's going to do the pushing. And that guy can then do the push, you take the terrain, you hold it for him and he goes elsewhere. It's a possibility, you just don't see it happening very often. Now as for the terrain, he's going into Hotel, which is a very open area, and over there his catch and hold territory or tactic might work. I would always try to get these structures. If you have these, then you're basically denying the enemy the opportunity of using this bridge, and therefore bringing in reinforcements along the middle axis or the left axis of the map towards Lima, towards Hotel. They can no longer capture the area, and that would be ideal. Holding this tree line is a fallback position, and usually what you see is that the enemy team captures this tree line. Fires at your units in Hotel from there, units in Echo, units in Lima. So this tree line is really important. Now let's see what he's starting out with. We have all the blue units here. He's starting out with an LVTP. Interestingly, a couple of M1 Abrams, a couple of M60 ERAs, ITVs, 4 ITVs at that. Now, AGGM vehicles in the open can definitely work, but you need some sort of heavy firepower and or units to soak up the damage. And the M1 Abrams, as well as the M60s, are just not good enough in that role. If you're going to an open terrain like this, always make sure you bring a super heavy. M1A2, M1A1, stuff along that lines has enough armor and a good enough gun to go one-on-one against an enemy tank if it absolutely has to. You basically need that 23 points of armor penetration, or even 24 I believe in the M1A2 version, to just knock out anything that might get close. The ITVs are not a terrible idea, but the thing is that they only have 20 points of penetration. The M1s only have 13 at a range of 2100, so they're already outranged. And if you look at the M60s, they do have the range, they do have a decent gun, but they don't really have the armor. You're looking at 12 armor on that tank. And with that, you're in a bit of trouble, because this means that if the enemy is pushing at you with a couple of heavy tanks, then your ITVs aren't going to do a good job. Your M60s will get overwhelmed, they'll die first, leaving your weaker guns on the Abrams alive. But those things cannot hurt the enemy, so that's another problem that you have. Now he did send forward a attack helicopter or a scout helicopter, which immediately got knocked down by a Ka-52. And as he writes in the comments or in the description as well, this is where he panicked. I'm not going to say not surprisingly, but I get where he's coming from. Because it's not something that you normally expect. And therefore he leaves his light riflemen as well as his stingers over on the rear of the flank here. Which is where the light riflemen are never going to see any action. Unless you really have to fall back. And the stingers are only going to be effective if you're dealing with a couple of helicopters that might be pushing along the flanks. Talking about helicopters, we got a couple of Mi-8s already pushing forward. These guys are from... the girl has a name. The Chaparral is doing an admirable job knocking them down. But if this guy goes down, he only has the Pivats for backup. The Pivats, at that, is too far behind. Its range against helos is 2600, whereas the range of this thing is 3300. Now, you see that he knocked down a couple of helicopters. This one might be out of ammo, I'm not sure yet, but it is at least retreating. And he just retreated his whole force back to his air defense net. The better way to do that would be to get the whole air defense network to go through to the offensive units, or to the units that are there to hold the area. Now, if you have, let's say you are going to go with 4 ITVs, with 4 ATGM vehicles, shut down 2 of them, or shut down one section of 2. Because what just happened is that he fired at, I think it was a BTRD or something similar, a cheap transport. But instead of the missile hitting, the vehicle already got taken out by an M1 or an M60. I'm not sure which it was, and it's not relevant. But because of that happening, all 4 missiles missed. So you're already down 4 missiles, which you can definitely use in case of enemy tank pushes or vehicle pushes. Another problem that I spot here is a lack of reconnaissance units. He barely knows what is firing at him, but considering that they are coming from the structures, they are probably Concours, Concours M, stuff like that, heavier ATGM infantry. As you can see, the Abrams took a good hit there and is knocked down to half health. And because of that, he's immediately retreating. This is something that you do see more or less experienced people do. They tend to get knocked on the head and then they go, oh crap, I need to get my units back into cover. And I think that I did the same thing when I was still playing ranked. My first couple of ranked games, I ran into resistance and I was like, oh crap. Cover. Yeah, I'm gonna sit here. By sitting here, you're giving the enemy control over hotel. And by doing so, you gave them that was +1 income, which is absolutely valuable in a conquest game. Now to make matters worse, red already has a +2. So you really need to start pushing here. He's bringing in a recon Cobra. The thing is with the Cobra that while it has pretty good spotting capabilities, it's also very easy to knock down. In a situation like this, where you have a large open terrain, I would use cheap Humvees or Rangers. Cheap Humvees can be spread out. You can have one over there, one there, one there. And since they're only 15 points, it doesn't really matter that much if you lose them. Rangers are even stealthier. They can be pushed up along the open, moving from cover to cover, and thereby can be a bit more aggressive in their spotting. Now Tunguska is moving up, and I don't know for certain if he spotted that, because he's still pushing his Cobra forward, and he is basically running right into the Tunguska, thereby once again losing his reconnaissance ability. Let's see what other units he has coming in. Take note that his air defense is still a bit behind. He has the 1 Chaparral there and 1 Pivats. The Pivats is active. Make sure that if you have a radar-guided unit such as the Pivats or any other kind of long-range AA platform such as, let's say, a Hawk, make sure you have them all selected and put them under a hotkey. So select all the units and then press Ctrl and one of the numbers. That way you have them all under a single command group, and then you press H. I'm not sure if that's the standard key, but that's the one I use. You press H for weapons off. Otherwise, what happens is that the enemy can send over a seaplane directly over the middle, let's say over Hotel and Echo, and it starts to find out radar sources and kill them, meaning that you lose your Pivats. If that happens, you're down to your Chaparral and your Stingers. Chaparrals are not particularly good at shooting down enemy airplanes, and they do tend to run through their missiles pretty quickly. So with that, you basically lose most of your air defenses. And also take note of these Abrams. When they're not blinking, like their buddies, the M60 ERAs, when they're not blinking, they're being detected. So you know that these tanks are being spotted by something. He is pulling them back, but he's pulling them back seemingly only after he potentially saw the artillery come in. If he wouldn't have moved those, the tanks would have taken significant damage, and with Conley, one of those M1s, already taken heavy damage, I don't think it would survive that encounter. So be very careful there. Make sure you always check your units if they're blinking. If they're not, move them or get more aggressive with your own reconnaissance capabilities. And always make sure you have more reconnaissance capabilities, because with this Cobra going down, he's basically having to rely on the full-fledged assault unit, which is the Marines, in order to do a bit of scouting. That's not really a safe way to do it, because the enemy, at this stage, most likely has reconnaissance units close. Marines, while they are pretty good at fighting infantry, are not that good at spotting. They only have medium optics. So once again, it's not blinking, and therefore the enemy knows you're here. Moreover, these units are not in cover, so they're not going to start blinking anyway. But this again is probably being detected by the enemy. Let's have a look. What can they see? Yep, they can see the Marines. They got Spetsnaz over there. They can see the Humvees. And with the Humvees having stopped here, he probably knows that something was offloaded there. And then, judging by the amount of veterancy of these units, you can pretty much infer what kind of unit came out of that Humvee. Now his setup over here is mostly defensive. He has one sniper team, and it would have been really bloody difficult to see these. One Tunguska M. A couple of BMD-3s carrying VDV-90, they got just offloaded and are probably heading towards this tree line. Concours M, Gornos, as well as Iglas. Now those helicopters that you saw initially, that were skirmishing with your forces, that was this delivery, the Gornostroki 90. With these guys in place, with a pretty decent ATGM, you at least make sure that the enemy is not going to rush these structures. So he offloaded probably Gornos, potentially Concours and Iglas, to make sure that this structure and thereby this strategic point was never going to get captured. At least not quickly. And then once the helicopters were empty, he basically didn't have that much of a use for them anymore. So he pushed them forward as a delaying tactic, which worked out fantastically well. Now it could have been significantly worse. It could have been so that Red had a couple of tanks posted along this line by now. In which case, Disco would have been forced to pull back to this line, which would have been a terrible situation, because from there there's only one fallback position. That's the other side of the river. It's not where you want to be. Now he was moving his ITVs slightly. He's trying to get his tanks back into position where they might get a bit of cover. Humvee has picked up Stingers, and after it's taken a bit of fire, it's immediately trying to get back into a position where it's no longer in line of sight of the ATGMs. Over towards the middle, we do have a couple of units from A Girl Has a Name as well. He seems to be mostly working together with Horst Bimbo to push on this guy. Push on Raspelmus. Now what this means is that he likely doesn't have too many units around Hotel. So every now and then, when you are not too busy, try to mouse over the units that are around your allies to see what unit is belonging to what player, and therefore what player is where. Because with that information, you know how busy a player is. And if you see, for example, units from The Girl Has a Name on Hotel, you see them on Lima and you see them on India, then you can be reasonably sure that they're not going to be heavily micromanaged. And thereby you can make sure that you have a pretty good chance of pushing through on one position. Because it also means that that player has his forces spread out, meaning not one big ball of units somewhere. Not one big kill zone. I brought in a couple of AGS. AGS are very, very nice support tanks. They have a good rate of fire, 13 rounds a minute. Great gun, but they're absolutely glass cannons. And the problem with them is that they have great firepower, but they need someone to take the punches. The M1 Abrams is not that candidate. And as he's moving up with these forces, there is another pretty disturbing lack of reconnaissance units. meaning that he has to rely on the Messiah Ats to spot the enemy, and then he can shoot them. Had he had a couple of reconnaissance Humvees here, or other cheaper reconnaissance units, perhaps Rangers in this tree line, he would have spotted this thing possibly before it got there, and therefore been able to take it out. So don't rely solely on Cobras. And there they are, the Humvees, M134s. Bring those in sooner. They're only 15 points. I don't particularly care in a situation like this if you use those with a machine gun or slash minigun or the grenade launcher, because both of them are equally suitable to the job. So long as they have good scouting capability, you're good. Now, as his helicopters from probably a girl has a name were pushing forward against the Pivads and the Stinger, they were taken out. But there's the MiG-25. That's the seed aircraft that I was warning about. Make sure you turn off your radar guided units, otherwise you will lose them. Now these Hawks are returning fire, thereby giving their position away, which is not terrible, but it does mean that the MiG-25, after it's done repairing, is likely to come back. And if the enemy is really on the ball, and I guess that these guys were too busy to do so, if they are really on point, they can immediately plunk down an attack marker, meaning that I need artillery on this position, which in turn would cost you your Hawks, so 120 points of air defense. You don't have these many units to begin with in your deck, so make sure that after you have fired from a position, turn them off and move them. So I would turn them off and then move them over there, or split them up, move one over there, one over there. And with that, the chance of them being killed off by either a consequent strike or an artillery strike is far less likely. Now once again, he has quite a nice amount of tanks sitting out in the open here, presenting themselves as a target. He already took cluster munitions once, and he's probably going to take them again once those cluster artillery units have resupplied themselves. I suspect, yep, this is what the enemy can see. They are all perfectly spotted. The most dangerous tank among these would be this one, the Leopard 2A4 from Raspelmus. This thing actually has a nice gun as well as nice frontal armor. It has, in by itself, I'd say more survival chances than most of these tanks combined, with potentially the exception of the AGS. They might be able to overwhelm a target by the sheer points of armor penetration. This one still has better AP, so make sure that you get your units into cover, otherwise you will get punished for not doing so. Cobra continuing to fly around. It is still very, very much at risk of that Tunguska. We don't know exactly where it is, but we do know that it is going to be still here, because it hasn't been taken out. Now he's pushing a CV in. The thing is that in a situation like this, where it's a very, very fragile landscape, or very open, a fragile CV like a Humvee CP would not be my first choice. If you are going for a deck, which is by his own designation a turtle deck, so a more defensively geared deck, then make sure you have a more heavily armored command vehicle. Now you don't immediately have to go for the Command Abrams. It would be perfect in this capability, especially if you can get it inside this tree line. But you are, with the US, definitely been given more, you have been given a lot more different options, especially for command vehicles. I believe the M60 Command is also quite a nice option and could definitely help out here. If you would, for example, want to capture Delta, that's where a Humvee CP would perfectly come in useful, because this one is not that likely to take any short-range fire, any artillery, or to be in a perfectly predictable location. And you can see that Raspelmus is using an Achsarit, which is very heavily armored. It's 10 frontal, 6 side, 2 top, so artillery safe. This one is not that likely to get killed off. If you could communicate with your allies, and you can always at least do so through chat, You could say, hey, I see you have a very, very heavily armored CV over here. I can send mine to Delta. Can you relocate yours to Hotel? Because yours has a far better chance of survival. When you do that, though, make sure that your CV is in Delta first before you ask your teammate to move him out. Otherwise, you're giving the enemy a +2 again. And for example, for Bravo, a command infantry unit, as this guy is using, would be ideal. Command vehicle would only have these small tree lines. You might be able to park it in a town. Wouldn't recommend it. And still, with a command infantry unit, these buildings are perfect. Now he is pushing his tanks forward, once again without reconnaissance units. And we have already seen that the enemy has a couple of BMD-3s there. He already used those. And unfortunately they kill off, once again, his only reconnaissance unit. The Cobra once again got shot down. And with the other reconnaissance unit dead, he once again has to rely either on his teammates, and look at the reconnaissance units that Respelmus is using here. A Bradley, a V-150 transport, and a Ranger unit. He's basically only going reconnaissance here because he realizes just how critical that is. Recon wins you the game. Or recon loses you the game if you don't have enough of it. It is usually, and in my case mostly as well, the most underused category of units. So try to get those in as soon as possible because they are absolutely critical to your victory. Now he's pushing forward more M60s, more M901 ATV or ITVs. As for other units, it doesn't have that much. We do have a bit of defense around the main zone. 1 Pivads and 1 Gazelle. So the main zone, Foxtrots should be secure. I'm not worried about that one. Now he's potentially bringing in this Hammer to resupply his damaged and or out of fuel units. And especially if you have an open terrain, where you know your units are going to be maneuvering a lot, try to bring that Hammer in a bit earlier. Because I would rather have too many supply units here, and basically have my tanks top all the time, full of fuel, than have a situation like this. Where this Abrams is sitting on the front line, and it just has no way out. Not in the sense that there is no cover, but it doesn't have any fuel. The ERA is in an even worse spot. The AGSs can still move, but have been detected, and thereby are once again at grave risk. So once again, the cover issue. If you would want to push up alongside Hotel and get some more units, for example in here as a first stepping stone, and then over there to the second tree line, try to bring some mortars. Make sure you have those, for example, either in separate sections, so 1 mortar per hotkey, or that you bring them in duo stacks or quad stacks even. Because with that you can very quickly put up a large smoke screen. First off, over here, making sure units can take this tree line, and potentially smoke up the rest of the tree line and push in your Marines, because we have seen that he has Marines. You can bring in Marines 90. And those guys are ideal at taking this tree line and then pushing forward, potentially getting a flank on this command infantry. And of course, your mortars from a position over here could potentially already take out that Führungstroop that you see over there. As for units, I think that by now he's floating a lot of points, meaning that he has a lot of points in reserve. So all of those units could be used. Oh, this is going to be painful. All of those units could be used to support the front line, hold the front line, reinforce the front line, or support his allies. Now, KF-50 Akula pushes in and kills off the tanks that have been stranded. Not exactly sure why he brought in the Raven at this stage. The reason that I use the Raven usually is to clear out enemy anti-air defenses, to make sure that I have my bombing run, which he's going to follow up, as a pretty safe route. If you don't have any specific target for a bombing run or an airstrike, then sending in a Raven is not that useful. as in Conquest, killing off stuff and gaining points is not the priority. You need to gain terrain. Had he, for example, brought in his Raven and then pushed with a bunch of helicopters, that would have made more sense. Because then he would have been able to clear out enemy air defenses, knock down infrareds, or at least have an idea where the infrareds are. And I know that the infrareds, of course, cannot be targeted by the seed aircraft themselves, but the infrareds will give their position away by just firing at the overflying aircraft. So that is a situation where I would definitely go for a seed aircraft. But we have a consistent Su-27U patrol here. So pushing forward along this line is very, very dangerous. Now, the Akula is getting quite aggressive here. It's taken out quite a few vehicles already, now working over the other units. And to make matters worse, he's taking artillery fire, so he's forced to retreat his CV or risk losing it. And so far the CV is quite lucky not to have been hit yet. Once again, combination of lack of reconnaissance, lack of AA, and basically a lack of potentially a game plan. That's once again one of those things that I ran up against when I had the ranked game. I didn't really have a follow-up or a follow-through plan. Because once you have this position, what's your next step? What are you going to do? What do you need in order to obtain that objective? To complete the mission of, for example, making this your first objective and then that your second. What do you need? I'd say a couple of tanks, maybe ITVs here if you really want to use those. Smokescreen, so mortars. And then push through this tree line with LVTP-7s and or LVTP-7A1s with Marines disembarked from them, so pushing through the tree line. Now his allies aren't doing very well either, unfortunately. We have, I cannot even pronounce this, some sort of Russian guy who is holding onto Bravo. But for a significant portion of the game, the enemy team has had a +2. And thereby is massively winning the game. Now once again, I don't blame him, because if you're just getting into Wargame, then getting into multiplayer is a daunting prospect as is. Then trying to control all of your units, especially against definitely experienced players, otherwise this guy wouldn't be a corporal and a sergeant major. And probably this is another team as well. So he's... oh, there's the M1A1. He's not doing very well, I'll definitely give you that. But he's at least having the guts to go out there and do the multiplayer thing. So I gotta give him credit for that. This M1A1, I was hoping you'd have it in your deck. Make sure you bring it out earlier and push it there, right from the start. You want to have that firepower. The enemy, at this stage, is preparing a smokescreen and thereby potentially pushing up. Let's see what they have. Yep, the Spetsnaz VMF are moving forward. And other than that, it seems to be a bit of a bluff, as there are no follow-up units coming in. But look at this, they have a quad stack of mortars standing by, and judging by the amount of rounds that they fired, they have done a lot of fire support, probably towards the middle and suppressing Echo, because I didn't really see that many mortar rounds land here, if any. Now with that, unfortunately his score is not going to be that good. Was to be expected. If you're new to the game, then this is what your score screen is going to look like. Anyway, if you have any further tips for Disco, then please leave those in the comments down below. There's a lot to be learned about Wargame. I still don't know everything, so if you have seen anything that I have missed, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm going to be pretty strict with the comment section in this one. Comments such as, "Oh my god, that was painful to watch," are just going to get deleted. It is that simple. Stuff that isn't helpful to newer players or in general is just going to get deleted. It's that simple. I want to make this a channel where we help out the new guys, not where we shit on them. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope that if you're a newer player, you learned something from this. If you are an experienced player, that you've already commented or you're still going to leave a comment. And if you have a replay that you would like to send in, the link is up in the description down below. If you want to send in your replay, there's the way to do it. So, hope you enjoyed. I'll see you soon for more Wargame.